All right, welcome to Witchpolice Radio. One of the things that I think regular listeners to the show know that I do kind of periodically is I like to go on Bandcamp and just scope out everything I can find that has Winnipeg tagged as a location and just listen to kind of reams of Winnipeg stuff and then sort of find artists that are maybe new to me or albums I haven't heard or things like that. And so the guest on this episode is someone that whose music I kind of discovered that way. I found your album um, via Bandcamp just from seeing Winnipeg tag on it, and I really really enjoyed it. And I've been kind of listening to it, on and off since whenever it was that I discovered it, and we're talking
Mhm.
now. But I think the best way to start this off is if you'd like to introduce yourself and just give a bit of background about what it is you do as a musician.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think it's pretty cool that you just discovered Well Sister organically like that.
Yeah,
Pretty
it was
neat.
kind of a fluke, I think, but I stumbled on it. And the album title
Yeah.
sounded interesting, the cover looked interesting, and I gave it a listen. And yeah,
Yeah.
here we are.
Really cool. Yeah. So my name is Jamie, and my project or my musical moniker is Well Sister. And I started this project back, I believe, in 2015 or 16.
Okay,
Yeah, and so I just had started the project and had recorded an EP and got that out. And then yeah, my life kind of took a turn and I kind of took a hiatus from music for several years. And so recording this full length was my reemergence back into making, producing, recording music.
cool. And
Yeah.
just because we've all kind of just gone through this for the past 2.5 years or so, was this something that was recorded and released and all of that sort of during the pandemic?
Yeah, so I recorded most of it during the pandemic. Like I recorded over 2 years. So I did the first three songs, I believe in early 2020. And then I recorded the rest of the album during the pandemic.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was that like? I mean, I know everyone's kind of been affected by this situation we've all been in, but especially creative people, right? It's been hard because
Yeah.
you can't do. I mean, people couldn't get together and play music together. Playing shows
Mhm.
just were out of the question for a long time there. What was it like for you as an artist trying
Yeah.
to put out new music in this time when no one can really do anything, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think in terms of like actually producing, recording the album, the fact that we were in the middle of a pandemic, I think it carved out time that myself and perhaps the folks I record with. So I record the album with a band Slow Spirit, also from
Cool.
Winnipeg. So they co-produced it with me and Eric Roberts recorded it. So I imagine if the pandemic hadn't been, our lives would have all been a lot busier and we may not
Sure.
have like the time, right? So I would go, the way we recorded it is I would go up to their place near Ryan Mountain and stay with them for like 4 or 5 days. And we approached the recording with kind of like a really like with a lot of slowness and rest, and it was not like a pressurized experience. So in some ways, all that to say to your question, I think that in some ways the pandemic was conducive to our approach.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Although I would say, yeah, in terms of actually releasing the album, I only released it in June. So
Mhm.
I mean, we're still in the pandemic, quote unquote, but
Of course, yeah, yeah. It's still
yeah,
still ongoing.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah. So the limitation of not being able to play shows is has kind of gone away, which puts me in a position too where I'm also debating now whether I want to still do an album release because when I was planning the release of the album, I wasn't sure if I wanted to organize shows at that point, and now I'm
Okay.
thinking, maybe I could have, but I
Yeah.
didn't. So here I am.
Well, now you're in a situation where shows are that they're happening
Exactly.
now, right?
Yeah,
You kind of
yeah,
in large numbers. So yeah, it's definitely possible.
yeah.
Um, the thing that I find most interesting about the album, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a lot more, is that I listened to it. I musically I dug it. It was very kind of haunting. Some of the music and vocals. One of the songs has a very kind of prominent saxophone that I really liked in it, and
Mhm.
so I just kind of gripped me from that way. But then I looked up what the title meant, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it. I'll let you do that in a minute.
Yeah.
But I mean, so there's this whole kind of mythological aspect to it, and then there's also obviously some life experience stuff that really informed sort of what
Mhm.
direction you took with the songwriting and what the album's actually about. So maybe a starting point would be, what does the title mean and how do you say it? Because I'm not going to be able to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I can help you with that. I wouldn't expect you to know how to say it because it's not even a word that I was familiar with a year ago.
Right.
So catabasis. Yeah, it's a Greek word from mythology, which you clued into. Yeah, and the word is represents, or it means, I guess you could say, um, it represents the arc in like myths when a character has to go into like the underworld, or kind of like they have this death to self experience,
Okay.
and they go into the darkness, hell, and it's necessary for them to go through that for them to become what they're supposed to be. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm assuming that's a Greek word, right? Is that just
Yes.
in Greek mythology? I mean, that's kind of story kind of happens throughout a
Yeah.
lot of different
So
types of.
exactly. So that word specifically comes from, is a Greek word, but that plot line is true to many myths from all sorts of traditions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess then, what is that? Is that what the album is about to you? Like, did you go into the album
Mm.
kind of wanting to create that kind of story with these songs?
Yeah, so the songs, I mean, I didn't, that name of the album only came later. So I wrote all the songs when I was personally in like a really dark psychological experience. So the album really chronicles my journey living with mental illness. And
Okay.
so that's part of why in 2017, 18, when I stopped making music, it was because I got really, yeah, for lack of a better word, made me sick and unwell. So OCD and depression kind of just descended on me in a way that was rather severe.
Okay.
And it took me out, to be quite honest. And it took me quite a long time to find my way through that, to get help. And a lot of the songs I wrote in the midst of that. So even though I wasn't performing or recording, I would, yeah, find myself sometimes on the odd day being able to get to the piano or the guitar. And so most of these songs are written when I was recovering
Okay.
from being in a really dark mental space. And so when I was trying to think of a name for the album, all the songs as a whole, I feel like are, yeah, like a testimony to moving through darkness. So
Well, it
Catabasis
fits.
felt like very fitting. Yeah.
When you were writing these songs, was it kind of was it like a type of catharsis to get that out in song form, or
Oh,
was it just like, what was the kind of I mean,
yeah.
obviously you're
Oh,
dealing with something very difficult at the time, but
mhm.
you're speaking musically very eloquently about it with these
Yeah.
songs.
Oh, that's a good question. And other people have asked me that too. To be completely honest, I don't think in the moment it felt cathartic.
Yeah.
I think it really felt like I'm just showing up to this thing because it matters to me. And even though actually I don't feel like it matters right now, as when someone's really depressed, they don't, nothing really matters.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
it was like a lot of writing the songs was like a really conscious choice. Like I'm going to still engage in my craft because it helps me reconnect to myself. So I think it cathartic, I don't know. It definitely didn't feel like when I wrote it, it felt like, oh, I'm being emotionally released from something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, now it's interesting though, because now in hindsight, listening to the songs, there is something really it feels almost cathartic retrospectively. Yeah, I don't know how else to explain it.
Which is kind of like a weird way to look at catharsis, I guess, right? As something that
Yeah,
you discover
right.
way after the fact. But yeah, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, yeah.
What is it like? I guess, I mean, had you always been writing songs even prior to this record that had that kind of personal subject matter and dealing with kind of those kind of
Mm,
emotions and sort of laying yourself out there for people to hear?
yeah, yeah, I would say so. I mean, I don't know if I ever sang specifically about the darkness of my mind in such an overt way. But yeah, I think my songs have always been extremely vulnerable and personal and really yeah, are my way of navigating struggle. Right.
Okay.
So I definitely do think that if someone were to listen to all my songs, they'd be like, wow, she really writes a lot about her personal struggles with, spirituality and emotions and, yeah, relationships. So yeah, definitely there is that. I struggle to write really cheerful music.
But I think all of those things you just discussed, I mean, no matter what kind of music it is, or everyone's writing about that in some way or another, whether it's
Yeah,
direct or whether it's, you have to
absolutely.
parse the lyrics to get to the point of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So this came out on vinyl, which is very exciting. I mean, that's exciting for anyone, especially these
Yeah.
days. What was that always the plan? Like, had you always intended to release this in physical format?
Yeah, it was. And in part because CDs are kind of obsolete. I really felt like I needed something physical to like represent all the work
Yeah,
and all the struggle. So it felt really important to me to have something physical to like honor what I had made versus just having something digitally. And I'm a huge vinyl fan, so um in some ways I did it for myself too. I just like
that's
so
awesome. Yeah,
badly. Yeah, I just really wanted to have my music on vinyl. And enough people encouraged me. I think too, that was part of it. Like lots of friends and family were just like, oh, you have to do this, put this on vinyl. So that just
cool.
gave me the push because yeah, it is a hassle and it costs a lot of money and it's not a money maker. Let's just put
No,
it that
no,
way.
it's great to see though. I mean, as someone who is definitely like a Luddite and I only listen to physical stuff, I love seeing that. I mean, it's I'll have to get a copy at some point, but yeah, it's
Mhm.
very cool. What has the reaction been? I guess among people who know you personally, and probably known some of the struggles you're going through, sort of more directly than just a casual listener.
Oh, hmm. What has the reaction been? I don't know if I can even answer that
Okay,
question. Um, I wonder if part of it is well, certainly like my close friends are I know that they're like proud of me
yeah,
and
yeah, of course.
um but it's one of those things like I don't know what you can you can compare it to. Like releasing an album, I don't know unless for other people who put in that hard like labor of releasing an album. I don't think maybe the general public uh probably don't perceive or understand like the weight of that and
Yeah,
maybe don't always provide the feedback and responses that one might want like when you give birth to a baby.
sure.
There's all this like congratulations and fanfare, and I have to say I did find releasing an album kind of anticlimactic, um but I don't want to now minimize the people in my life who've like affirmed me in my process, but maybe it's also because, I didn't do an album release. And
I was going to ask about that. Yeah, yeah. If
I,
that was
I
maybe part of
think
it.
I think that's a huge part of it because that's like a natural place where people can really like uh respond to your music.
Well, it's a celebration of it, right? It's like a
Yeah,
formal acknowledgement that it's out in the world now.
totally,
Yeah.
totally. So without that, it's felt kind of weird and lackluster. So as a result, I actually so myself and Slow Spear are actually hoping to do an album release this fall because I was like, yeah, without this kind of like event, you kind of don't feel like I feel like there needs to be some more acknowledgement.
Yeah.
But that sounds kind of selfish. Like I not meaning to be acknowledged, but like this thing that I made maybe didn't get the acknowledgement that I wanted it to get. So yeah,
Well, yeah, just having put that much time and effort into it from everyone
yeah,
involved, just getting the recognition that like
yeah,
this is a
yeah,
thing, it's here, it's out there. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. But it's interesting because the people who have, yeah, so I don't, there are people who have sent me really meaningful messages. So I do want to acknowledge that. But it's interesting because there are people who are either like musicians themselves or artists who I think can really relate to the process and labor and heart that goes into it. So
yeah.
probably the most meaningful things I've heard have been from like other artists
Well,
for
that
sure.
makes sense too, right? Because
Yeah,
they've done it. They've been there,
yeah, yeah,
regardless of what the circumstances are, or
mhm,
what type of thing they're doing. They've gone through the whole start to
yeah,
finish. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
How do you sort of define this the sound that you have on the album? I mean, it seems like we're in an age where everything has 16 different subgenres and everyone has all these different labels. And I mean, it seems like maybe basic to call it a folk record, but there's more
Yeah,
going on than just folk, right? I mean, how do you sort of
yeah.
define what the
Oh,
sound is?
yeah. I'm so bad at this.
Well, it's a hard
Yeah,
question because it's
yeah, it's tough. It's tough for sure. Yeah, I mean, like if I were just used to use a generic label, I'd be like, oh, I guess it's indie folk rock, you know. Um, but yeah, like there's qualities to it, right? And I don't know if there's genres that can really capture the qualities, but you used a good word earlier, which is haunting.
Yeah.
And I do
Well,
think
that
there's
was the first thing I thought when I heard it too. It got that.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of haunting qualities. I really love um hmm, I don't know if you call it eerie ambient sounds, but like string sliding. I really like
Yeah.
sliding parts. I've always had this affinity to parts that slide. And I think there's a lot of like I really like was intentional about how we record the vocals. I want them to sound really like kind of really close up
Okay.
and to really like hear the texture of taking a breath or my voice. And so I think, you know, it's very vulnerable and kind of raw. And I love that the album's not like we record it in a home
Yeah.
slash shed. And I really appreciate that. Like, it's not like a lo-fi recording by any means. Like, it's really well produced, but it's not overproduced.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Well, there's a
really,
character to the room. You can tell that
oh
there's
yeah,
like a vibe
yeah.
to. Yeah.
And I really like that it doesn't have this like overproduced radio sound to it, for maybe lack of better terms.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
yeah. So that's a good question. I don't know. Were there qualities or genres that you picked up on?
It's the same. It's the same problem, right? Just like everything
Yeah.
has so many different. Every subgenre has 6 other subgenres, and it's hard to keep track of even what anything is. I mean, like folk is obviously there. I guess I don't know. Is alternative folk still a thing? I don't even I don't
Yeah.
even know
Yeah. I
anymore. But
think
yeah,
it's definitely still a thing.
yeah,
Sure.
yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I like it's nice. It's cool to hear that that was recorded in that way because I think that that adds to kind of that haunting quality that I heard was
Hmm.
having those kind of like you said the breaths between lines and the fingers
Yeah.
sliding on strings, and that kind of has not an old sound to it, but like kind of an openness to it, like a space.
Mhm.
I don't know. The room has a vibe, I guess, is what it
Yeah.
sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It's cool, yeah. So whatever you want to call it, whether it's
Yeah.
indie folk, rock, alt folk, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly. And I like heavier music too. And I'm sure like that part of me comes through a bit in certain songs. I think that my next, if I do another album, it'll be more, I don't know, heavier. I don't know if that's the appropriate word to use, but maybe more rock and roll. I
okay,
don't
okay.
know.
Well, because I think this is plenty heavy in terms of like subject matter and just overall tone, right? I mean,
Yeah,
heavy
yeah,
doesn't necessarily mean distorted, right? It means
yeah,
just kind
yeah,
of, yeah, yeah. So yeah,
yeah. Maybe
heavy.
I should say that I want my next album to be more rocking.
Right, right. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Well, I guess what is your background as far as music goes then? I mean, I know you said you had an EP before this with this project. Were you in
Mhm.
other bands prior to
Yeah. Yeah. I was in a band, like in my early 20s, I was in a band called From Giants for many
okay.
years. Yeah. And then that kind of dissolved naturally, I don't know, in 2014, 15. Right. So then I naturally started Well Sister, which was a solo project. But yeah, like going way back, like I'm not classically trained at all. But the people I made the album with like come, you know, with lots of they're like music, they're like musicians proper, I would
Yeah,
say.
that helps.
You
That
know?
definitely helps. Yeah.
Oh yeah. You know, like I didn't go to jazz school or I can't really read music. So I'm like very self-taught by ear, that's my musical background. You know,
Yeah.
of course I like played bass in jazz band growing up and like was always drawn to music and playing music. But yeah.
Well, I think I find that it often works really well when you have a combination of people where some have just extreme amount of training and theory and all of that, and then some people are self-taught and are coming at it from a totally different perspective. And when you mix those, you can kind of get
Hmm.
something really interesting out of it. Versus a band where everyone is extremely well trained and
Yeah.
they all know the rules, and then there's less chance of breaking them because
Yeah.
it's too programmed in their
Yeah.
heads to.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I'm not the person you want to like uh have me join someone's band because I'm gonna like add all sorts of like interesting stuff. Like I'm a songwriter. I'm a songwriter and I'm not great at jamming or like yeah,
Yeah,
learning
that
other learning other people's songs.
I can relate. I haven't been in a band in like 15 years, but I was always someone who I could play my own stuff, but no, no one else's. It's like, can you play
Yeah.
this cover song? Nope, I have no idea what chord is that. So yeah, I get it. I get it.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, I know you, like you said earlier, you're kind of not sure what's going to happen as far as potentially doing a release show and things like that. But what is sort of what is the plan now, just in general with this record? I mean, it's been out for a few months, and now things just the world has opened up a little bit. Are
Yeah.
you? Well, I guess first of all, are you as far as songwriting, are you past this already, or are you still fully into the mode of this record, or have you already started working on new
Oh
things?
no, no, I'm still fully in this album
Okay,
mode. I
okay,
think this, I always had the mindset that like releasing this album will be like a 6 month to a year long investment.
okay.
Um, so yeah, like when I released it in June, I always in my mind was like, I can't do an album release now. My life is just, there's too much going on, but maybe I'll do it in fall. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's the hope. The hope is to do an album release in October. And yeah, I mean, promoting an album takes a lot of time and energy.
yeah, yeah. Well, and it's so
So
different than how it was even 5, 10 years ago too. Just with
yeah,
the
yeah,
way that
my stamina right at this moment's a little bit low, but I'm hoping it will hoping I will find the gusto to keep at it.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, what exactly that will look like, I'm not sure, but for the fall, I think I'm gonna put energy into doing an album release, which yeah, comes with lots of rehearsing. So
Sure,
that'll take up
sure.
a lot of my time.
Well, that kind of brings me to my next question too. Is, I mean, like you said, this is a solo project, but obviously you have other people playing on the record with you. Do these songs work in both ways? Like, are these songs that you think
Hmm.
are just as effective if it's just you playing them solo versus the kind of more filled out sound on the album?
Yeah, good question. I personally, there's maybe like 2 or 3 songs I think are fine as standalone, like just myself and guitar.
Yeah,
But I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy about performing with just me and my guitar. Like, I don't know. I maybe find it a bit boring. I
sure.
don't know. Yeah, I really like. I love hearing the songs like filled out and having the layers present. So yeah, I would play solo if I had to, but it's not my
Right.
preference.
So
Yeah.
it seems likely that if you are do a release show at some point, it'll be with a
Oh
band.
yeah,
And
yeah. If
yeah,
I do a
full on.
release show, it's going to be with a full band.
Cool, cool.
Yeah.
And so for people who are hearing this and maybe hearing you for the first time, what's the best way to find your music? Where can people hear the album?
Yeah. Well, it's on all the streaming sites, Spotify, iTunes, so on and so forth. Bandcamp, obviously, is another place like where you found it, and you can buy the vinyl there as well. Yeah, and then like I'm pretty active on Instagram. That's super relative.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, yeah.
So by my standards, I'm active on Instagram. By someone else's, I would not be. But yeah, I try to keep on top of that. So it's a good place. Like if anything new or emerging is going on, like I will notify people on Instagram. So Well Sister Music. Yeah,
Cool. And I guess, is that the best place to find out about potential future shows and things?
exactly. Yeah.
Because I mean, the good thing about this being a podcast, it's is it August still? It's August, and it's end of August now. But when someone hears this, it could be 6 months from now, it could be a year from now, it could be whenever. So
Yeah.
you may very well be on to the next record by the time someone checks this out. So who knows, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Awesome.